The press conference was chaos. Sterling Technologies stock had plummeted 40% in 3 days, all because of engagement rumors. CEO Victoria Sterling stood at the podium, her composure perfect but her eyes betraying desperation. Cameras flashed. Reporters shouted questions about her broken engagement. Then she saw him, the janitor, cleaning the stage corner, invisible to everyone else. Without warning, she crossed the floor, grabbed his hand, and pulled him close. "Pretend to kiss me for 10 minutes, she whispered against his lips. "I'll handle everything else." The room went dead silent. Then their lips met, and the pretend kiss became something nobody could explain. Daniel Morrison had been cleaning office buildings for 3 years now, always taking the night shifts so he could be home when his daughter Lily woke up for school. Most people never noticed him, which was exactly how he preferred it. They didn't need to know that the man pushing the mop cart had once designed cutting-edge medical devices, or that his hands, now rough from industrial cleaners, had once sketched blueprints that could have saved thousands of lives. That life had ended 5 years ago, when his wife Catherine died, not from her illness, but from the stress of fighting a legal battle they couldn't win. A major pharmaceutical company had stolen his design, then destroyed him when he tried to fight back. They buried him in lawsuits, drained their savings, and Catherine's weakened heart couldn't take the strain. She died in his arms on a rainy Tuesday morning, making him promise one thing: live with kindness, Daniel, even when the world isn't kind to you. He kept that promise every single day. He moved to a smaller apartment, took the janitor job at Sterling Technologies, and poured everything into raising Lily. She was 8 now, with her mother's curious eyes and gentle spirit. She didn't know her father had once been someone important. She didn't need to know. What mattered was that he was there every afternoon for homework, every evening for dinner, every night for bedtime stories. He taught her chess on an old wooden board, made her lunch with notes written on napkins, and never missed a school play, even if it meant switching shifts with coworkers who barely knew his name. Victoria Sterling was everything Daniel wasn't, or at least, that's what the world saw. At 32, she was the youngest CEO in the company's history, a woman who'd climbed from junior programmer to the executive suite in just 8 years. The media painted her as ice personified. Brilliant, ruthless, untouchable. They loved to photograph her in her glass office, 60 floors above the city, always alone, always working. What they didn't capture were the nights she stayed there until 3 in the morning, not because of deadlines, but because going home to an empty penthouse felt like drowning. They didn't see her reading her mother's last letter over and over again, the one that said, "If you can't love someone with your whole heart, don't love them for their convenience." Her engagement to Richard Blackwood had been exactly that convenient. He was heir to Blackwood Industries. Their marriage would have merged 2 tech empires, and everyone said they looked perfect together in photographs. But perfect was just another word for empty. And when she'd found him with his assistant 2 weeks ago, she'd felt more relief than pain. The problem was, Richard wasn't just any ex-fiancé. He was now her biggest competitor, and rumors of their breakup were destroying investor confidence. She needed to control the narrative. Needed something dramatic enough to shift attention. Needed someone completely unexpected. That's when she saw Daniel during the press conference preparation that morning. He was adjusting a microphone stand, careful and precise, invisible to her assistants who walked past him like he was furniture. But she noticed how he handled the equipment with an engineer's touch, noticed the way he studied the acoustic setup with knowing eyes. She filed it away, not knowing that in 3 hours, desperation would make her remember this quiet man who seemed to understand things without speaking. When their eyes met across that chaotic ballroom, when she grabbed his hand and pulled him into that kiss, she expected him to pull away. Any normal person would have. Instead, he steadied her with gentle strength, playing the part she'd asked for with surprising grace. His hand found the small of her back, supporting her without possessing her. He kissed her like they'd done this 1,000 times before, like he understood the assignment was to sell an illusion. But somewhere around minute 3, when the cameras were still rolling and her heart was racing from more than just adrenaline, Victoria realized she'd forgotten she was pretending. The kiss that saved Sterling Technologies' stock price lasted exactly 10 minutes and 37 seconds. By the time Victoria finally pulled away, her lipstick smudged and her carefully styled hair slightly mussed, the narrative had completely changed. The broken engagement with Richard Blackwood was already old news. Every tech blog, financial newsletter, and gossip column had the same burning question. Who was the mysterious man who'd captured the Ice Queen's heart? Daniel had tried to disappear immediately after, returning to his supply cart as if nothing had happened. But Victoria's assistant Hannah had caught him in the service elevator, her tablet already showing the explosion of coverage online. "Miss Sterling needs to see you," she'd said. Not unkindly, but with the tone of someone who didn't expect to be refused. He thought about Lily, about the promise of invisibility he'd made to himself, about how complicated this could make everything. But he also thought about the desperation he'd seen in Victoria's eyes, the way she'd trembled against him despite her composed exterior. Against his better judgment, he'd followed Hannah to the executive floor. Victoria's office was exactly what he'd expected. Glass and chrome and spectacular views, but also what he hadn't. There were no personal photographs, no warmth, nothing that suggested a human being spent 12 hours a day here. She stood with her back to him, staring out at the city below, her reflection ghost-like in the window. "I need to be clear about something," she said without turning around. What happened downstairs was a calculated move. Our stock has already recovered 7%. By market close, we'll have gained back everything we lost this week. She finally faced him, and Daniel saw what the cameras never captured: exhaustion that makeup couldn't hide, a brittleness that suggested she might shatter if touched too roughly. Richard Blackwood is attempting a hostile takeover. He's been planning it for months, probably before we even got engaged. The broken engagement was supposed to destabilize the company, make the board lose confidence in me. I needed something dramatic to counter the narrative. Daniel understood hostile takeovers. He understood what it felt like to have everything you'd built threatened by someone who smiled while they destroyed you. "Why me?" he asked simply. Victoria almost smiled at that. "Because you're invisible. No digital footprint I can find. No social media presence. No connections to anyone in my world. You're perfect precisely because you're nobody." She paused, seeming to realize how cruel that sounded. "I mean that you're nobody to them. The media, the investors. Richard, they can't use you against me because they can't find anything about you." She moved to her desk, pulling out a document that looked like a contract. "I need you to keep playing this role for 2 weeks. Just until the shareholders' meeting. We'll stage a few public appearances, nothing too demanding. I'll provide you with appropriate clothing. A cover story. Whatever you need. In exchange, I'll set up a full scholarship fund for your daughter. Elite schools from kindergarten through graduate school, all expenses paid." Daniel felt his chest tighten. She'd already researched him, already found his weakness. But when he looked at her, really looked at her, he didn't see a manipulator. He saw someone drowning who'd grabbed the first life preserver she could find. "You know about Lily. I know you're a single father. I know you work nights to be there for her during the day. I know you're doing everything alone." Her voice softened slightly. "I respect that. I'm not trying to manipulate you, Mr. Morrison. I'm offering a business arrangement that could benefit us both." He thought about Lily's school, where budget cuts had eliminated the art program she loved. He thought about the college fund he'd never be able to build on a janitor's salary. He thought about Catherine's voice telling him to be kind, even when the world wasn't. Sometimes kindness meant helping someone even when they could only see you as a convenient prop. 2 weeks, he said. "But I have conditions. I keep my job here. I don't miss any of Lily's school events. And she doesn't know about any of this." Victoria nodded quickly, relief flickering across her features. "Of course. Hannah will coordinate everything. Can you start tomorrow? There's a charity gala, and appearing together there would solidify the narrative." As Daniel left her office, he wondered what he'd just agreed to. He'd spent 3 years being invisible, and now he was about to be thrust into spotlight he'd never wanted. But something about Victoria Sterling's hidden fragility reminded him that everyone was fighting battles nobody else could see. Even ice queens, apparently, could crack. The transition from janitor to CEO's boyfriend required more than just expensive clothes, though the clothes certainly helped. Victoria's personal shopper arrived at Daniel's apartment the next morning with an entire wardrobe that probably cost more than his annual salary. Lily watched from the couch, eating cereal while cartoons played, as strangers transformed their living room into a temporary fitting area. "Are you going to a costume party, Daddy?" she asked, giggling when he emerged in a tailored suit that made him look like the executive he'd once been. "Something like that, sweetheart," he said, kneeling down to her level. "I'm helping a friend with something important, but it might mean some different schedules for a couple weeks. Mrs. Patterson next door will watch you a few extra evenings. Is that okay?" Lily studied him with those two wise eyes she'd inherited from her mother. "Is your friend nice?" Daniel thought about Victoria's desperate grip on his hand, her trembling masked as confidence. "She's trying to be." The charity gala was held at the Museum of Modern Art, a glittering affair where champagne cost more per glass than Daniel spent on groceries for a week. Victoria met him at the entrance, stunning in a midnight blue gown that made her look like she'd been poured from starlight. But her hand shook slightly when she took his arm. "Remember," she whispered, "we've been secretly dating for 3 months. You're a consultant from Seattle, helping with our new medical technology division. Keep the details vague." What struck Daniel most about the evening wasn't the opulence or the scrutiny of hundreds of eyes watching their every move. It was how naturally they fell into rhythm with each other. Victoria laughed at his dry observations about the pretentious art installations. He steadied her when her heels caught on the marble floor. When Richard Blackwood appeared, all sharp smile and calculating eyes, Daniel instinctively pulled Victoria closer, his hand protective on her waist. "So you're the mystery man," Richard said, his tone suggesting he didn't believe it for a second. "Funny how Victoria never mentioned you before." "Funny how she never mentioned a lot of things about you either," Daniel replied calmly, "though I'm starting to understand why." The flash of anger in Richard's eyes was worth whatever complications this might cause. Victoria's surprised laugh, genuine and unguarded, was worth even more. As they danced later, she whispered, "That was unexpected. The consultant from Seattle doesn't usually have claws. Even nice guys have limits," Daniel said, spinning her gently. "Besides, he seemed like the kind of person who deserved it." For a moment, Victoria's mask slipped entirely. He destroyed everything he touched and made it look like love. "I thought that was just how relationships worked." She caught herself, stiffening. "I'm sorry. That's not appropriate." But Daniel just adjusted his hold, keeping her close. "My wife used to say that real love makes you more yourself, not less. If someone makes you disappear, that's not love, that's theft." Victoria stared at him, something shifting in her expression. For the rest of the evening, her smiles seemed less calculated, her laughter less performed. When photographers asked them to pose, she leaned into him like she belonged there. By the time they left, even Daniel had almost forgotten they were pretending. Living at Victoria's penthouse was supposed to be part of the arrangement. "The paparazzi are watching," she'd explained. "It needs to look real." But nothing about her home felt real at first. It was all white marble and floor-to-ceiling windows, beautiful and cold as a museum. Daniel brought Lily over after school one day, when Victoria was at work, just to pick up some clothes he'd left there. But Lily, being Lily, immediately made herself at home. "Daddy, she doesn't have any pictures," Lily announced, scandalized by the bare walls. "Or books, or toys. Does anyone actually live here?" When Victoria came home early and found them there, Lily was drawing at the dining table while Daniel made grilled cheese sandwiches in the pristine kitchen that had probably never seen actual cooking. Victoria froze in the doorway, looking lost in her own home. "I'm sorry," Daniel started. But Lily had already bounced over to Victoria, holding up her drawing. "I made this for you. It's you and Daddy and me at the park. See? You're the one in the pretty blue dress. Daddy says blue is your favorite color." Victoria took the drawing with careful hands, studying it like it was a priceless artifact. "It's beautiful, Lily. Thank you." Her voice was soft, almost wondering. Would you like to stay for dinner?" That became their pattern. Daniel would cook simple meals, while Lily did homework at the counter. Victoria would arrive home to the smell of actual food, the sound of laughter, the warmth of life being lived in spaces meant for it. She helped Lily with her math homework, discovering she had a gift for making complex problems simple. Lily taught Victoria to play Crazy Eights and Go Fish, card games that had probably never been played in that penthouse before. One evening, while Lily was absorbed in a movie, Victoria found herself beside Daniel on the terrace, city lights sparkling below them. "I don't know how to do this," she admitted quietly. "The pretending is easy. It's the real parts that confuse me." "What real parts?" Daniel asked, though he knew exactly what she meant. The way she unconsciously reached for his hand during meetings. The way she smiled now. Unguarded. And genuine. When Lily made her laugh. The way they moved around each other in the kitchen, with the comfortable choreography of people who belonged in the same space. Catherine must have been extraordinary, Victoria said, instead of answering. To inspire such loyalty, even after she's gone. Daniel was quiet for a moment. She was. But she also would have liked you. She had a thing about seeing through people's armor to who they really were underneath. She would have seen what Lily sees. What does Lily see? Someone who needs to remember that it's okay to be happy. That success doesn't have to mean being alone. Victoria turned to look at him, and in the soft light, she looked younger, more vulnerable. "I'm going to hurt you," she said, like a confession. "I don't know how to not hurt people. It's all I've ever done." Daniel thought about all the ways he'd already been hurt, all the scar tissue that had formed around his heart. But he also thought about the way Victoria had started leaving sticky notes for Lily in her lunch bag, little encouragements and jokes. The way she'd hired his co-worker's son for an internship without mentioning it was her doing. The way she was slowly becoming someone she'd forgotten she could be. "Maybe," he said. "Or maybe, you'll remember how to be yourself, instead of who everyone expects you to be." Before she could respond, Lily appeared in the doorway, rubbing sleepy eyes. "Can we all watch the stars together? Mommy used to say they were angel lights." Victoria's breath caught. Lily had never called anyone but Catherine Mommy. But Victoria just opened her arms, and Lily climbed into her lap like she'd been doing it forever. They sat there, the three of them, watching the city lights that were the closest thing to stars they could see. Daniel pretended not to notice when Victoria wiped her eyes. She pretended not to notice when he reached over and took her hand. They were getting too good at pretending not to notice things that mattered. Everything shattered on a Thursday morning. Daniel was fixing a broken elevator sensor when his supervisor called him to the office. The television was on, showing Richard Blackwood at a press conference. "I think the public deserves to know the truth about Victoria Sterling's new boyfriend," Richard was saying. His smile sharp as glass. "Daniel Morrison isn't some consultant from Seattle. He's a janitor in her building. But more importantly, he's a man who was fired from Nexus Pharmaceuticals 5 years ago for stealing proprietary technology." The screen filled with old personnel files, legal documents, carefully edited to paint the picture Richard wanted. Daniel watched his past being weaponized, saw his wife's death reduced to a footnote about personal tragedies following professional disgrace. By the time Richard finished, Daniel had been transformed from invisible to infamous. Victoria was in a board meeting when the news broke. Daniel could see the exact moment she found out, watched through the glass walls as Hannah whispered urgently in her ear. Their eyes met across the office space, and he saw the war in her face, the desire to protect him battling against the need to protect her company. He knew which one would win, had to win. He didn't blame her for it. The board's decision was swift and unanimous. The relationship had to end immediately. Victoria had to publicly distance herself from him. The company couldn't afford another scandal, not with the shareholders meeting next week. Daniel was escorted from the building by security, his janitor's uniform and badge confiscated, his 3 years of quiet service erased in 3 minutes. Lily was at school when he got home. He sat in their small apartment, surrounded by the designer clothes Victoria had bought him, and laughed at the absurdity of it all. He'd known this would happen, had always known that stepping into the light would mean his past would find him. But for a few weeks, he'd let himself believe in the fairy tale. He'd let Lily believe in it. When he picked Lily up from school, she was crying. Sophie's mom said, "You're a thief." She said Miss Victoria fired you because you're bad. "Is that true, Daddy?" Daniel knelt down, holding his daughter's face gently. Sometimes people say things that aren't true because they don't understand the whole story. But you know what? It doesn't matter what they say. What matters is that I love you, and I will always be here for you. But what about Miss Victoria? She loves us too, right? She wouldn't believe bad things about you. Daniel thought about Victoria in that boardroom, surrounded by men in suits, demanding she choose between him and everything she'd built. Sometimes, sweetheart, grown-ups have to make choices that hurt, even when they don't want to. It doesn't mean they don't care. It just means the world is complicated. Lily wiped her nose, thinking hard. Like when Mommy had to go to heaven, even though she wanted to stay. Yes, Daniel said, his throat tight, exactly like that. That night, after Lily was asleep, Daniel sat at their small kitchen table and wrote Victoria a letter. Not an email that could be hacked, not a text that could be screenshot, but a real letter on paper. He wrote about understanding her choice, about not harboring anger, about hoping she'd find someone who could stand in her light without casting shadows. He wrote about Lily missing her. He wrote about missing her too, though that wasn't part of their arrangement. He mailed it to her office, knowing she'd probably never see it, but needing to say goodbye properly. 3 days passed. Daniel found work at a different building, farther from home but with better pay. Lily stopped asking about Victoria, though she kept the designer backpack Victoria had bought her, running her fingers over it like a talisman. Life returned to its quiet rhythm, and Daniel tried to convince himself that was enough. Then Victoria called her second press conference. She stood at the podium in the same room where their story had begun, but this time she was alone. No assistants, no board members, just her and a stack of documents. "I have something to say," she began, her voice steady, but her hands gripping the podium. "And I need you all to listen very carefully, because I'm only going to say this once." She proceeded to systematically destroy Richard Blackwood. She had receipts, actual receipts, showing how Nexus Pharmaceuticals had stolen Daniel's designs. She had emails proving Richard had orchestrated the legal attack that destroyed Daniel's life. She had evidence that Richard's current company was built on technology Daniel had created. But more than that, she had recordings of Richard admitting to it all, bragging about it during what he'd thought was a private celebration of their engagement. "I've been complicit in a culture that destroys good people for profit," Victoria said, looking directly into the cameras. "I've stood by while men like Richard Blackwood crushed anyone who threatened their empires. But I'm done being complicit. Daniel Morrison is not a thief. He's an inventor whose work has saved thousands of lives, even if his name was erased from the patents. He's a father who gave up everything to protect his daughter from a world that had already taken her mother. He's a man who helped me when I needed it, without asking for anything in return except that his daughter's future be secured." She paused, and for the first time in her professional life, Victoria Sterling let her voice crack. "He's also the man I've fallen in love with, not as part of some arrangement, not as a business deal, but genuinely and completely. I'm probably too late to tell him that. I'm probably too damaged to deserve him, but I couldn't stand here and let his name be destroyed again, not when I have the power to stop it." The press conference erupted into chaos, but Victoria was already walking away. She'd just thrown a grenade into her own life, potentially destroyed her career, definitely made an enemy of one of the most powerful men in tech. But as she walked out of that building, she felt lighter than she had in years. The board tried to stop her, of course. They threatened to remove her as CEO, to sue her for damaging the company's reputation. But something unexpected happened. The stock price soared. Public opinion, fickle as always, had completely shifted. Victoria Sterling wasn't the Ice Queen anymore. She was the woman who'd chosen love over money, truth over power. Sales increased 40% in 3 days. The shareholders voted overwhelmingly to keep her as CEO. Richard Blackwood's empire crumbled within a week. Federal investigators, armed with Victoria's evidence, raided his offices. Patent lawsuits were refiled with Daniel as the plaintiff. The truth, buried for 5 years under legal threats and corporate power, finally came to light. It was raining when Victoria finally went to find Daniel. Not a gentle rain, but a downpour that soaked through her coat before she even reached his building. She stood outside Lily's school, waiting, watching other parents with their bright umbrellas and sensible rain boots. She probably looked ridiculous in her designer heels and ruined silk blouse, but she didn't care. She saw them before they saw her. Daniel was holding a broken umbrella over Lily, who was jumping in puddles despite his gentle protests. They were laughing, completely absorbed in each other, a perfect unit of two that didn't need anyone else. Victoria almost turned away then, almost convinced herself that they were better off without her complications. But then Lily looked up and saw her. "Miss Victoria!" Lily shrieked, running full speed through the puddles. She crashed into Victoria's legs, soaking her even more. "You came back! I knew you'd come back. Daddy said you had important things to do, but I knew you wouldn't forget us." Victoria knelt down in the rain, not caring about her ruined clothes or the parents staring at them. "I could never forget you, sweet girl. Either of you." Daniel approached slowly, the broken umbrella forgotten at his side. "Victoria," he said, and her name sounded like a question and an answer all at once. "I know I hurt you," she said, standing but keeping Lily's hand in hers. "I know I chose wrong at first. But I need you to know that it wasn't pretend for me. None of the real parts were pretend." Daniel studied her for a long moment. This woman who'd upended his carefully quiet life, who'd given his daughter a glimpse of family again only to disappear, who'd just destroyed her own world to rebuild his. "You didn't have to do what you did. The press conference. Richard. None of it." "Yes, I did," Victoria said simply. "Because that's what you do for people you love. You fight for them. You choose them. Even when it's scary. Even when it costs everything." Catherine knew that. She would have done the same for you. Something shifted in Daniel's expression at the mention of his wife. "She would have," he agreed. "She also would have told me I was an idiot if I let you walk away again. Does that mean you forgive me?" Daniel pulled her into his arms, rain streaming down both their faces. "There's nothing to forgive. You did what you had to do. So did I. But now we get to choose what happens next." "I choose you," Victoria said against his lips. "Both of you. If you'll have me. No contracts. No arrangements. No pretending. Just us." Lily tugged on both their coats. "Does this mean we can be a real family now? Like, with movie nights and Sunday pancakes and everything?" Daniel and Victoria looked at each other, then down at the little girl who'd somehow orchestrated all of this with her innocent wisdom and stubborn hope. "Yeah, sweetheart," Daniel said. "A real family." They kissed there in the rain, not for cameras or stock prices or anyone but themselves. It wasn't a 10-minute performance this time. It was just a kiss, simple and true. While Lily danced in puddles around them and complained that they were being gross. It was perfect. Victoria officially hired Daniel as Senior Vice President of Medical Technology Development. It wasn't charity. His designs, finally attributed correctly, had revolutionized 3 product lines. He worked regular hours now, dropping Lily at school each morning and picking her up each afternoon. Victoria learned to leave the office by 6, to cook simple meals badly but with enthusiasm, to read bedtime stories with different voices for each character. They moved into a new place, neither his apartment nor her penthouse, but something they chose together. It had a garden where Lily could play, a kitchen big enough for family dinners, walls that quickly filled with photographs and Lily's artwork. It was a home, not a showpiece. Together, they launched the Morrison Foundation, named for Catherine, providing free medical devices to families who couldn't afford them. The first recipient was a single mother whose daughter needed the exact device Daniel had designed all those years ago, the one that had been stolen and hidden behind corporate greed. Watching that little girl receive the help she needed, watching her mother cry with relief, Daniel felt something in his chest finally heal. "She would be proud," Victoria said quietly, her hand in his. "Of the foundation? Of you. Of how you never let them break your kindness. Of how you kept your promise to her even when it would have been easier to become bitter." Daniel thought about that promise, about choosing kindness even when the world wasn't kind. He looked at Victoria, who'd learned to choose love over fear, who'd become the mother Lily needed and the partner he'd never expected to find again. "She would have loved you," he said. "She would have loved how you fought for us." Richard Blackwood was convicted on multiple counts of corporate theft and fraud. His company was dissolved, its assets distributed to the inventors he'd stolen from over the years. Daniel received a settlement large enough to ensure Lily's future was secure, but he kept working anyway. He loved the work, loved creating things that helped people, loved coming home to Victoria and Lily, arguing about whether robots or dragons were cooler. The wedding was Lily's idea. She announced it over breakfast one morning, matter-of-factly stating that if they were a real family, they needed to have a real wedding. But not a fancy one, she declared. A fun one. With cake and dancing and maybe a bouncy castle. They compromised on the bouncy castle, but kept everything else Lily wanted. The ceremony was held in the garden of Lily's school, the place where Daniel had worked nights for 3 years, where he'd found solitude in simple work, where everything had somehow led to this moment. The guests were an eclectic mix, janitors and executives, Lily's classmates and board members, people from every part of their lives that had seemed so separate before. Victoria wore a simple white dress that Lily had helped pick out. Daniel wore the suit from their first fake date, now filled with real memories. Lily, the self-appointed ring-bearer and flower girl and officiant's assistant, wore a purple dress with sparkles that she declared was the most beautiful dress in the history of dresses. When it came time for the vows, Victoria surprised everyone by speaking first. "I used to think love was a business arrangement," she said, her voice carrying across the garden, "something you negotiated, with clear terms and exit strategies. Daniel taught me that real love is messier than that. It's burnt dinners and homework arguments, and dancing in the kitchen at midnight. It's choosing each other even when it's inconvenient, especially when it's inconvenient. It's finding someone who sees through all your armor to the person you forgot you could be." She turned to Lily then. "And it's discovering that family isn't just about blood or papers. It's about showing up. Every day, even when you don't know what you're doing, especially then. Lily, you taught me that. You and your dad saved me from a life that looked successful but felt empty. You gave me a reason to be brave." Daniel's vows were simpler but no less meaningful. 5 years ago, I made a promise to someone I loved to stay kind, even when the world wasn't kind to me. I thought that meant staying small, staying quiet, staying safe. Victoria, you showed me that kindness can also mean fighting for what matters. That love isn't just about protecting people from hurt, but about being brave enough to hope for happiness again. You brought light back into our lives when I'd forgotten to look for it. Lily insisted on adding her own vows, though nobody had expected it. She stood between them, holding both their hands, and spoke with the wisdom of someone who'd lost much, but refused to stop believing in love. "I promise to teach you both all the new games I learn. I promise to eat vegetables sometimes, even though they're gross. I promise to help with chores, without being asked more than 3 times. And I promise to love you both forever and ever, even when you're old and wrinkly and embarrassing." The crowd laughed. Victoria cried. Daniel lifted Lily onto his hip so she could be part of their first kiss as a married family. The photographer captured that moment the 3 of them connected, laughing and crying simultaneously, perfectly imperfect. As the reception began and Lily ran off to organize a kids versus adults dance battle, Daniel and Victoria stood together watching the sunset. "No regrets?" he asked. Victoria thought about her old life, the one with perfect surfaces and hollow victories. "None. You?" Daniel pulled her closer, thinking about the journey from that first desperate kiss to this moment. "Only one." "What's that? That kiss at the press conference?" "It didn't really last 10 minutes. More like 8.5. Victoria laughed, that genuine, unguarded sound that had become his favorite music. "Well then, Mr. Morrison, I guess we'll have to make up for those missing 90 seconds. "I guess we will, Mrs. Morrison." They kissed as the first stars appeared, as their daughter's laughter rang across the garden, as their friends and chosen family celebrated around them. It lasted much longer than 10 minutes this time, and nobody was pretending anymore. Some kisses change everything, in an instant. Others, the ones that matter most, change everything slowly, gently, one real moment at a time. The Morrison family story wasn't a fairy tale. It was better than that. It was real, built on burnt dinners and board meetings, bedtime stories and breakthrough innovations, the courage to trust after loss and the wisdom to choose love over fear. It was proof that sometimes the most unexpected moments, the ones that start with desperate gestures and impossible requests, lead to exactly where you're supposed to be. Years later, when Lily was grown and telling the story to her own children, she would always emphasize the most important part. Grandpa was brave enough to be kind, and Grandma was brave enough to change. But the real magic? They were both brave enough to believe they deserved to be happy. That's the kind of love that lasts, not the perfect kind, but the brave kind. And in that garden where it all began and ended, and began again, where a janitor and a CEO had discovered that love doesn't care about titles or stock prices or carefully maintained facades, 3 hearts had become one family. Not because of a 10-minute kiss that shocked the world, but because of all the quiet minutes that came after, when the cameras were gone and life was just life, messy and difficult, and absolutely worth fighting for.